Okay, picking this up right where we left off, we have our basic Niagara particle simulation, and now we're gonna do the same thing for fluids. So this will be an introduction to the volumetric fluid simulations. We can just delete this system from our scene and create a new one. So right click Niagara system, create an empty system, finish, and let's call it NS underscore smoke. Double click. Same as before, we need to create an emitter. So right click, add emitter. And instead of these particle templates, I want to click on parent emitters and select the grid 3D gas master emitter. Double click. It may take a few seconds for it to compile. And then you should have the smoke showing up in your scene like this. Now I know what you're thinking looking at this, like, oh my God, there's so many different settings over here. The good news is that you can pretty much ignore 99% of everything here. We can just actually collapse these settings because Epic Games has provided this emitter summary. And inside of this emitter summary, you have few main categories with the main settings that you will need. And I would say, again, 99% of all the settings that you will ever need to access to control your simulations will be inside of these main categories. So we have simulation, source, forces, collisions, render, and then the quality overrides and the debug we're not really gonna touch. So if you have an experience with any other fluid simulation software, maybe you've watched some of my Embergen tutorials, a lot of these settings are going to be familiar to you and they work the same way. So we have, pressure, buoyancy, temperature, gravity, dissipation, right? So a lot of these settings work the exact same way as they do in any other fluid simulation software. However, if you are completely new to this whole world, don't worry about it. We're gonna go over a lot of these one after another. I'm not gonna go over every single one, but I will point out a few of the ones that are really critical to know. So first one, draw bounds, basically just hides the red outline of the simulation grid. So if I just turn that off, then the outline is gone. This is actually important because the outline doesn't disappear automatically in your level. You have to disable it, otherwise it will always be there, right? So it's important to understand that the simulation exists only within the bounds of this red grid. And you can see that when it reaches the edge, the smoke is just instantly killed. Now we can control how big this simulation grid is with the world size settings. So I can expand it on the x-axis, maybe set this to 600. You can see it gets wider. I can do the same thing on the y-axis and I can make it taller, maybe set this to 1200 and I have a much bigger grid. However, the resolution of the grid has remained the same. Therefore, the smoke now looks more pixelated, right? Because it's the same resolution, but for a larger area. So what I can do now is just increase the resolution of the simulation from 200 to, let's say, 300. And I would say be careful with this. I usually stay somewhere between 200 to, I would say, 600 maximum from what I've been testing. Usually I will set this to about 450 as my sort of final quality. And this will be heavier to simulate, but it will produce nicer detail because now there's more voxels inside of the simulation grid. So I'll just set it back to 200 and maybe make the simulation area just 500 by 500 by, let's say, 800. So right now you can see our sphere source is near the bottom of the grid. What if I wanted it to be in the middle? That's what the local pivot is for. So you can just set the z-axis of the local pivot to 0, or you can just set it to maybe 0.25 and now it's in the middle, right? So that's how you control where the grid is in relation to the source. Next, you have density and temperature buoyancy. So really you can just replace density in your head with smoke and temperature with fire. And the buoyancy is whether it's rising up or going down. So right now it's negative 0.5 and it's going up. So if instead I set it to 0.5, you can see the smoke is now falling down. However, it's being killed as soon as it touches the border. Now, what if I wanted it to just collide with the grid instead of being killed? Well, for that, I can just go under collisions. And here under boundary, I can uncheck open boundary -z. So again, minus Z means the bottom of the grid, plus Z is the top of the grid. And then the same thing for the x-axis and the y-axis, right? These are the individual walls of the grid. So I can uncheck open boundary on minus Z. And now when it compiles, you can see that the smoke is now beautifully colliding with the floor of the grid. I'll go back under simulation tab and just set this to 0.25 for the local pivot. And we have some beautiful heavy smoke just falling down. So this is exactly what we're gonna do for the monster cryogenic smoke in the next video. Now temperature buoyancy is not gonna do anything right now because we actually are not computing any temperature. There's no fire right now. But here under attributes, I can just enable temperature, let it compile, and now I'm actually creating some fire too. So I can set the buoyancy to minus 0.5, and now we have more of a regular fire. But what I do change all the time are the dissipation settings for both the density and the temperature. So if I want the smoke to dissipate or disappear faster, I can just increase the dissipation rate for the density. So I can just set this to 1. And now the smoke is actually dissipating much faster. It's a bit hard to see, so let me again set this to 0.5. And the thing is that the temperature is creating new smoke as it goes, so we can increase the dissipation rate for the temperature to maybe 2. And now you'll see that the fire is dissipating much faster. And if I set the density dissipation to, let's say, 3, now the smoke is dissipating much faster too. So just to demonstrate, I can set it to 5. And the smoke is disappearing almost immediately. I can set the temperature dissipation to 5, and the fire is disappearing very fast as well. So this is something we're gonna tweak over and over again as we work on our simulations, how quickly we want the fire and smoke to disappear. Now over in the source tab, this is where we're gonna plug our particles to generate fire and smoke instead of the sphere. Right now it's just being emitted from that default sphere where you can change the radius over here. So maybe just set it to 25 and you have a much smaller sphere, or just set it to 75 to get something bigger. Again, you can control just how much smoke you're generating. So I can set this to just 1 to generate way less smoke. I can just set it to 0, right? And then I'll get just fire on its own. Next, we have forces. So we have some turbulence and vorticity, which is adding some nice detail into the smoke. So maybe you can just set it to 3. And then we can enable some additional turbulence. We can add wind as well. Next up, collisions. We can control collisions with meshes. We're also gonna do that later. And finally, we have render. This is where you control the colors of the smoke and the fire. So if I wanted, let's say, blue smoke, I can just change the smoke color here to blue. And the fire right now is just shaded with the black body shader. I can change that to curve, which will allow me to set my own colors for the color of the fire. So I can maybe just have, green fire like we're gonna do later in the course. Just change these colors to green. And here you go, you have some green fire with blue smoke very easily. Right, you will see me save a lot, maybe a bit obsessively, but once Unreal crashes on you, you're gonna be paranoid as well. And I have to say, it has crashed on me a few times while I was developing these effects. You try, pushing the values and the resolution a bit too high, and it can crash on you because it's just too much to handle all at once. So just, keep saving your work. And, just to demonstrate how easy this is, we can just drag our system directly into the scene. And here's our smoke directly in the scene. Now, one more thing I want to show you is the local position. As you can see with the particles, when I was moving the particles around, the emitter was actually reacting to the movement. However, the fluid emitter by default will not react to the movement. The smoke is not going left and right. So what you can do is just go back to emitter summary, simulation, and check compensate for actor motion. And now when you move it, you see it will actually react to the movement. So this is useful whenever you have any kind of a moving emitter, an airplane engine on fire, anything like that. And in the next video, we're gonna create the monster scene. And we will pretty much recreate this smoke and go over all of these settings again. So if you feel like you didn't catch it the first time, don't worry at all. We're gonna go over everything again as we create that scene. So I'll see you in the next one.